It's ridiculous that Iowa is playing an FCS team that is not Northern Iowa.
Well, I kind of agree with that, Mark. I don't see the point of it. I don't really see the point of it anymore. I don't really know. It doesn't make sense even from an Iowa standpoint. It makes less sense for Iowa to do it than for another school because, Kirk has built this program on being rather risk averse. This is a pretty risky thing. It's there is no positive here because you and I both know, Mark, ain't nobody going to care if he beats South Dakota State. And in college basketball, it's a little bit different. I know people, and I've been critical of it too, that Iowa doesn't play Drake and Northern Iowa year in and year out. It's a little bit different because you've got so many games, so many non-conference games that you can schedule. And Iowa, of course, has two in-state rivals besides Iowa State. They're not really rivals anymore, but two in-state schools. They don't play regularly. And Iowa doesn't schedule those schools. And, they won't admit this, but the reason is because they don't want to risk losing to them. So why would you, when you have less games to go off of, less games to schedule, why would you go out and schedule one of the best teams in the FCS? And it's not like they scheduled them before they were good. This has been a really good team for years. So I'm surprised that they do have South Dakota State on the schedule. They have UNI on the schedule coming up. I don't quite understand what the reason for that is. I'm not even necessarily in favor of playing UNI. I'd be in favor of it in basketball because I think the talent gap is less. But at least from the outside perception standpoint, you have people that perceive the talent gap to be really wide in football between a UNI and an Iowa. What's the point of taking that risk? And UNI is an excellent FCS program. So I agree to some extent with Oink Oink. Does Oink Oink live on a farm, Mark? Do you know? Has he talked about that? Okay. Yeah.
E-I-E-I-O.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't know, but you just got to get through this game because, boy, talk about a tailspin. Can you imagine? And they've lost. It's not like they haven't done this before. We brought up 2016. They've lost to a couple directional Michigan schools. They lost to Western Michigan in the early 2000s. I'm sure you remember that, Mark. I'm sure you remember. I was at the Iowa Central Michigan. What was that game? That game in like 2012. They played with fire against Ball State, I think in 2014, 13 or 14. So I don't think the talent, Mark, what's the talent gap in your mind between a South Dakota State and a lower tier MAC team like a Ball State? Now, Ball State's had good years. I shouldn't consider them. They're not a lower tier.
Yeah, whoever the lower tier in the MAC.
So top FCS team versus bottom feeder FBS.
I don't think that there is one.
I don't either. I don't either. And I think we label these things. Well, FBS, FCS. Who cares? That's the scary thing. Now, the good news is Kirk, he heaped tons of praise on John Stiegelmeier, as he should. He's been there as a head coach since 97, I believe, and has been with the program since the 80s. He's actually been with South Dakota State longer than Kirk Ferentz has been with Iowa in total. He's a South Dakota guy. And the players, certainly Riley Moss, Sam Laporta, these guys did not, Spencer Petras, they did not act holier than thou as it relates to this matchup. So I'd like to think they're taking him seriously, but until we see him on the field, you never know what's going through a kid's mind. And do I think they're taking this team for granted? No, given the coaching staff. That's one thing Kirk Ferentz certainly knows how to do is keep his guys with a level head. However, it's not perfect. It's not 100%. You never know. And when talent gap is less than maybe the outside perception may indicate that it is, I think that's a scary game. And we've been saying that for months.
And that's why I asked about matchups, because I think that has as much to do with it as anything. When, the talent gap can't be enormous. And just because you've got one matchup somewhere, you've got an NFL tight end. Okay, well, they bracket him. He's gone. That's the end of the game. But if you can be in the ballpark athletically, and then maybe you win the turnover margin by 2, and you have some matchups that favor you, or in Iowa's case, going against them, it only, let's put math into the equation, that the more the score stays closer to 0 than it does to 50, there's going to just naturally be a closer gap in score. And so if you can stay within 7 to 10, then something crazy can happen, and it's possible.
And I'm looking through the map. I mean, I don't know. Certainly, I'm not as well versed on South Dakota State's roster as Matt was or as Tyler Merriam is, but I mean, I don't know. The good news is for Iowa, I would say the strength for South Dakota State is those skill position spots, with the exception of Jamari Harris being out, which is that could come into play here. I don't know of any other place on the field, at least on that side of the ball, where I would say a South Dakota State can clearly take advantage. And I don't even know if they're going to be able to take advantage of Terry Roberts, because I don't think there's a big gap between Jamari Harris and Terry Roberts. Now, again, depth-wise, if either Moss or Roberts goes down, then you start to get a little bit concerned, because Brendan Diaz-Fernandez and TJ Hall and Cooper DeJean, whoever's coming in there at corner, doesn't have a whole lot of experience there. Cooper DeJean, I think, the only guy that actually has taken snaps at corner. So, I mean, yeah, tight end, I would expect Iowa to really utilize Justin Jacobs. I think it's one of the best linebackers in the Big Ten. I think you could say that about every one of Iowa's linebackers. But as Iowa's Leo backer, I think he's the guy you want covering big tight ends. But Trey McBride did take advantage of Iowa last year. And so, I mean, he brought up Zach Hines at 6'7", 260, and then Tucker Kraft at 6'5", 255. Those are two really big, skilled tight ends. Cooper DeJean, if he gets matched up on one of those tight ends, he's a small guy, Mark. He's like 6 foot tall, maybe. He's a really good athlete, but boy, you want to put him up against a 6'5" tight end? I don't know. It's going to be intriguing. And, I mentioned depth at the outset of the show. The depth along that defensive line, these are the matchups that you really need that depth. And the matchups that, back in 2011, I remember Iowa chasing whoever it was, Dan Purser, Kafka, whoever the Northwestern quarterback was, chasing him all over the field. And eventually I think Iowa came to the realization, hey, we need to just have more guys ready. And so they're not going to have a problem. Knock on wood, they haven't had any significant injuries along that defensive line. I think even if they did, unless you lose Van Ness or maybe Noah Shannon, who I think are your two stars right now, I don't see that. I don't see them missing a beat there. And you certainly want that when it's hot out and you're chasing a dual threat guy around the field.